We'd like to welcome you to the BmoreNews Morning Show. My name's Donnie Glover, publisher of BmoreNews.com, also author of Unapologetically Black. And we're here with the one and only Marsha Reeves Jews. Hey, Marsha Jews.
Good morning. How's everybody?
Doing good.
Oh,
Doing good.
We're very excited. Why don't you tell us about our guest?
Well, we have with us. Now, Tavis, I think you got to cut that off. We got feedback from all of that.
Hey, can you hear it? You don't hear it anymore, do you?
No, we're good.
Okay. We also have with us.
Okay, I was sharing it on my page.
Okay. Kivette, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, Marsha, we're going to be talking with Renee and Tavis Sanders about Black Indians. But before we get started, Marsha, I have to bring something to our attention.
Well, yeah.
And it has to do with the city of Baltimore. They're adding 45 new traffic cameras to the tune of $11 million.
45 traffic cameras.
So I'm in the middle of interviewing the comptroller, and their office says that the comptroller voted for the ATVES contract increase because the red light and speed cameras have multiple benefits.
Like?
The revenue they bring in, which cover the contract costs. They reduce traffic injury and fatalities. Less crashes means less time police have to spend monitoring and responding to traffic, putting more resources into other areas.
And how much was that?
$11 million. Now,
how much is the school budget?
I think Baltimore City contributes 13% to public education, the least amount of any jurisdiction in the state of Maryland. My understanding is the average is somewhere around 25 to 30% in other jurisdictions.
So there's no real cost benefit analysis been done to talk about what that income would look like if they capture all these people who've been speeding. Well, and what does that look like, and where does that money go?
Well, I can tell you my second question to her after the office answered that had to do with that very same question.
And where has that corporation done this before? What other cities are they in?
Well, that's what I'll be doing. I'll be looking up what cities have predatory cameras.
Correct. And that's what I'm very interested in.
That was
because now the number of people who are going to get those fines are going to be people that look like us.
Are we clear about that?
Right.
But traffic is already slowed.
Well, because ain't nobody going out in the car, going nowhere. They're at home.
Well, I just figured as soon as a new administration comes in, $11 million in the middle of a pandemic could be going to something a little more.
Yeah, how about putting $11 million in the households and connectivity for internet for our children to be able to learn, and they won't be behind in their education? How about we deal with the priority of the development of the children within the confines of this community? $11 million, you could have worked out a real deal with Apple or HP or anybody else doing any of those computers and locking in all of that doggone internet, Wi-Fi and mesh media and everything else for these children to be able to learn online like children who are homeschooled. This is outrageous. And that is a misuse of funds as far as I'm concerned, because ain't nobody going nowhere. Ain't no traffic. Sandy, go to the store, ain't no traffic. We can ride for miles, ain't no traffic, ain't nobody driving. Why you got to have that now? Wasn't that happening a year ago?
Okay, so let me say this. We were supposed to have him on the show tomorrow, but that's been moved to
because you called and got the information.
No. They canceled before that, since they were canceling, I said, well, you at least got to answer this question for me. Let me not say cancel. They postponed it until next week. Some other things came up.
Whatever.
So let me give you one other hot item that I have to share with you, Marsha, because I just want to bounce this off. I know you're a smart person, Kavette, you're the same. So last night it was announced on the news that the mayor is reducing the number of micro zones from roughly 100. I'm going to explain. You see the bully I got to deal with, Miss Renee. So
we're breaking up.
The long story short is, so say you're looking at this whole computer screen. It's divided into 4. So they want to divide it into maybe 2 zones.
Divide what into 2 zones?
The city.
What does that mean?
They've got little neighborhoods. Then they're saying they're going to combine neighborhoods so that there's smaller neighborhoods on the map.
That doesn't make sense to me. For what purpose? We've already voted and everything. You already got people elected. What are you talking about?
Well, because, okay, so I understand that to be that, okay, you look at the population of Baltimore and everyone, you know, we've talked about it a couple of times here, that the population of Baltimore has gone down significantly over the last decade. And so what they're probably...
That ain't got a damn thing to do with all of these guns going off. You can move the police over there. They popping people right here. But here's the real point. You know why they popping people?
Why they popping?
So much violence.
What's popping people?
Shooting. You know why there's so much violence? When you close a school, you close a community. You've closed all the schools in the East and West Baltimore butterfly, the black butterfly. Yep. You've closed schools. You've killed the community. But every night these news reporters come on. Oh, Baltimore's so bad. This person got shot. This person got shot. But these are in the very neighborhoods that you have starved to death.
Correct. There's nothing there. They're all deserts. They're all deserts. And the educational system, the people that you keep hiring and paying six figures to are not educating our children. So let's talk about that.
Okay. So let me ask you this, Yvette. I saw you about to go down that road, and I didn't want you to go too far.
Which road was she going down? Where was she? Where were you going? You going somewhere? Where are you going? I don't know where you're going.
She was going on Route 40 West. Route 40 West, deep. Okay, Yvette, do you have any Indian in your family?
I have Native American in my family. I do not know that I have any Indian in my family. That I would have to look into.
Native American, Indian, the same thing.
No, it's not. Indian is on the east side of the hemisphere on the earth. That's over in Asia, near Africa. That's Indian. Here we have the Native American.
I'm not playing semantics with you. You have some indigenous
Blackfoot. Yes, I'm from indigenous people. Blackfoot is the tribe.
You've answered the question.
Ooh.
Do you have indigenous blood?
Yeah.
Martha, do you have indigenous blood?
Yeah. That's what they say. I don't know. I haven't done my tree. That's what they told me. I'm afraid I might be related to somebody I don't like.
Okay. Well, Tavis and
Indigenous education would just shut down the volume on your computer, then that would be perfect.
Who?
Indigenous education, just shut down the volume on your computer. Yeah, because we're still getting the feedback. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I have not done
any feedback
genealogy yet, but I understand that we have Native American in it.
Okay, well, I gotta tell you.
Are y'all still getting any feedback right now?
Just a little bit.
Very little.
Do you have more than one device on?
You have your phone on. You can turn the volume down on the phone, so that you cannot
it's
hear
not on at all.
The show on the phone, or you cannot hear the show.
It's not on. Okay,
so the volume isn't on at all.
Okay, so how are you today, Renee?
How are you, Renee?
I am well, thank you.
Tavis, how are you?
You know, when
I am well, thank you very much. Outside of us wanting to make sure that our audio is good for y'all so that y'all can hear us. We're excited about being here and sharing. And I just would like to say that if you think about colonization and you think about us as a collective, the only people that would tell us who we really are is our family. And so for us to look at this system to identify the most oppressed people on this continent would be kind of like, what are we really doing? And so if your family said that you are Native American, you can trust that over any documentation that the colonizers and the usurpers of authority would have established with respects to who we are as a population today. And that's what we do here at Indigenous Education.
But Tavis, Skip Gates said that only 2% of us have indigenous blood. That's what Skip Gates said.
How is that possible?
And Skip Gates, hold up, are you disagreeing with Skip Gates?
Yeah.
Yes, we are. Well, you know what? Skip Gates also said that only 5% of the entire the entire transatlantic slave population wounded up in the United States. And so if only 500,000 of us wounded up here, how could only 2% of the population have only have Native American blood? The numbers are off, and propaganda. Propaganda. And that's something that we that we here at Indigenous Education like to point out from an educational perspective, and from a marketing and publications perspective. The historical research and references have been established by funding through the colonizers. And so they're only going to fund and print what they want printed.
Correct.
And so that's a whole nother point that we have to remember as we step into this new world and how they are reestablished and function in order. Here at Indigenous Education, what we're saying is that if history has been manipulated, then the populations may not be properly identified and definitely not categorized correctly. And again, everybody here said that we had somebody somewhere in our family said we were indigenous or native, but if we allow our colonizers to educate us about the history of this, and we use that because it is the mainstream consensus, the standard consensus, then we'll ignore things like that, the Bering Strait theory of migration, which established the American Indian, if we want to play semantics, right? The American Indian or the Native American population of the day, which happened about 13,000 years ago. That's mainstream. That's mainstream history. However, when you look at true history, printed in the science magazines and in articles, when we look at publications through very, very important schools like Hampton in South Carolina and Michigan University, we recognize that there's been a population that has existed here in the United States specific for over 50,000 years, particularly in the southeastern portions of the United States. We know nothing about a people that existed here 50,000 years ago.
Let alone 5,000.
Yet alone 5,000. Yet alone the fact that these people had colonies and had civilizations and had monuments built that predate any other monument in Africa or almost around the world. And so we have pyramidal structures, and we have monoliths that predate Egypt that were built by a brown-skinned population that United States history chooses to ignore. And if the brown-skinned population does not begin to educate themselves about what was happening so that they can truly self-identify, then we run into the issue where, they allowed to put up 42 street cameras and some foreign corporation is actually the ones that's issuing, the receipts, what I
Right.
mean, the tickets,
Right.
so,
when it is really
So I
from
have a
our
question.
perspective,
Right. I have a
yes,
question though, so that I'm really clear, and I'm a dig deep cut. Indigenous education. Are you a think tank? What can you speak to your mission and who you are and what you actually do? I'm very interested in what you're doing and the organization around that. Would you mind sharing?
definitely. Well, thank you very much. We realized we didn't properly introduce ourselves.
No, you just jumped in
My
and
name is
you gave good data. You gave good data, but you like handle it. And then I was sitting here like, oh yeah, that's great, but what do they do? So help me with that. Thank you.
No problem, no problem. So we're mother and son duo co-founders of a small nonprofit called Indigenous Education. And Indigenous Education has been, we've been around for 10 years. And our mission is to educate the public of the omitted history of the brown and dark-skinned indigenous populations, particularly of the southeastern portions of the United States. So that's the overall mission. And we satisfy that mission goal by, we have workshops, education workshops that we offer to the community. Right now, of course, over online. We also have a television program that we air in the Philadelphia area, and then on Roku and Apple, and trying to actually, we're moving into the Maryland, DC, and the Baltimore area this year with our television program called America's Dark Skin Past. We and we do cultural events such as a monthly full moon and new moon fire circles, where we offer the public. Well, we have an agreement with the city of Philadelphia. We're stationed out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We have an agreement with them to offer a fire circle in the park on the full moons and the new moons, and where we teach the neighborhood, give them an opportunity to sit down and just learn about some of Indigenous Ways Center and just be a part of nature, something that the inner city communities really don't take the opportunity to do. We do annual cleanups. And so, our mission is to educate and to, be the people, be that change that we keep requesting from the rest of the world.
That's very powerful. And so, first of all, before we forget, what is your website so that everybody can follow you and make sure that we know how to keep in touch?
Sure. So you can locate us at indedu.org. That's indedu.org. And, we have people on YouTube and on Facebook. So on Facebook, we're Indigenous Education. And on YouTube, we have an old documentary series that we have in some libraries and a few museums. We don't air them anymore, but it's called An American Deception. And so on YouTube, if you search An American Deception, you'll see about 50 different programs that we've been airing throughout the years and stuff like that.
So how did you two get involved in this? What made you decide to create this organization?
Well, I am an educator by profession. And I've taught in the Philadelphia school systems, and I taught in the Atlanta public school systems. And during my teachings now, I was a music teacher. However, I found that most of my time teaching, I was not really teaching my subject, but again, giving students information that they may not get in other areas. And you would find that there was much interest in them. Even in Philadelphia, if I asked a classroom, how many of you have Indian in your family? More than 3/4 of them would raise their hands. And when I came down to Atlanta, everybody raised their hand. We know this from, again, with the passing down, but we did not have the research there. And so that was my interest. It's like, and again, being an educator and really wanting my students, and I've always taught in the Black areas, I've always wanted my students to know who they are, their complete selves, not just one part of them. And so the research was very, very important. I actually had to quit my my teaching job after a while because it was taking more time than teaching was really taking away from my research time. So I actually had to stop teaching so that I could continue doing the research.
That's powerful.
I'm still learning every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And I just did it because I wanted to show my mama off.
And I know she's very proud of you. So in your research,
yes, I am.
I know you are. And you all smile alike, you have the same smile. One of the things I think that people don't really realize is that we have to pay attention. What is that? The old Sankofa bird, right? You got to know your past to see your future. And in doing this and doing your research, what did you find out about your past, about this whole indigenous business that wasn't available without the depth of research that you did?
Oh boy.
So I like to, shit. So I started public school when I was in 5th grade, right? And one of the days my father was walking me home and I had to ask him the question, why they keep telling me I'm not Black? And my father said, well, because you're not Black, you're Native American. And so I looked at my skin like, I'm the same color everybody else in that thing. What you talking about? Like, and he said, well, they just don't know, right? And that stuck with me. And so in my adult, as an adult, I look at my mom and I see all of this history, particularly the fact that the system has built their monuments on top of our monuments. And that really bothered me, from a historical perspective, right? And so moments in time that we as mainstream society and mainstream education really promote that enables, well, that hides, the reality that many of, dark-skinned America, United States anyway, is or does have indigenous blood. And particularly recently, my mother and I just did a show on 1619, and how prevalent that particular date is with respects to our history as Black America here. However, prominent schools, Hampton institutions, and a whole bunch of other individuals have questions with respects to the ancestral heritage of those 20 and odd Negroes. Now, if we don't allow those questions to be asked as a part of, the development of our history without our usurpers involved, and we allow that well, if you were Negro, you were African, and if you're and if you're African, then that means you're a migrant to this land, and thus you have to deal with the system and the structure that has been established. And that's just the reality that, or with respects to the 5 million slaves that existed in America at the end of slavery in 1860, whatever, right? Only 400,000 of them came from Africa. Well, who were the rest of those slaves? Right. And if we are the descendants of those slaves, then who are we? Remember, only 400,000 Africans out of 4 million came from Africa. I mean, slaves, excuse me, only came from Africa. So where did the rest of these brown people come from? Who are they? And if they came from here, what rights do they have that are being usurped?
and to strip their indigenousness, because even if they came from Africa and they married into these indigenous tribes, because most of the African slavery was male. And so these males were hooking up with indigenous women.
Right.
And if that is the case, then they were having indigenous children. However, these children, which are many of them we're the descendants of those children. And so if that is the case, then how are they changing the ancestry of these children and their descendants from indigenous to African, when again their mother was indigenous to this land? So why is their ancestry again being usurped?
And our question to the larger community is, if the identities are being usurped, what does that mean? And what do we do about that usurping of history, and then the lies that are being perpetuated within the educational system, only on us, only in ours. Everybody else knows that Negro was the term used in 1490 when the Spaniards got here, not in 1619 when the Negroes from the Caribbeans came here. And in the 1800s, they changed the terms. And that's another thing that's happening there. Because Negro is such a negative term, we're allowing them to go back into history and replace the term Negro with African. However, if you know history, you know that Negro was a term that they used for 200 years to identify the indigenous population before one African touched this continent. And so if that would be the case, then you need to stop changing the term Negro, but also we, as the descendants of a group of people that was used to be called Negro, we need to educate ourselves about that history, because we may be denying ourselves our rightful place here on this continent, and the ability to truly be autonomous.
I just want to interject one thing, that if you look up Luzia, Luzia, down in Brazil, you'll find that the oldest bones uncovered in the Americas were that of a big-headed Black woman. She had a big old forehead, just like the Brazilians do. And it was meant to make you smile, Marcia.
Yeah, what you did wasn't funny. Go ahead.
12 to 14,000 years old, the first American down in Brazil, found in the 70s. Help me out, Tavis.
Down in the Yucatan.
And the Yucatan.
Yeah, it was found in the Yucatan. And again, and the thing is that when they describe her in the science magazines, they say that she had more Southern Asian features than Northern Asian features. And this is something that we discussed. It's like, well, if they put that in a science magazine, that they have features that are more South Asian than Northern Asian, most people, when they read that, they just think of Asians, they think of this.
Correct.
And so they don't really think of the ancestry of that person. However, if you look at what South Asians look like, they look like everybody that is up on the screen right now.
Literally, they look like us.
Yes, they look exactly like us. Yeah, so again, we need to know what it is that they are speaking about when they say these things. If we know that they said that these people look like South Asians, then we would know that they're speaking that these people are Negroid. But we would never. Talk about what that gentleman is from that's from northern that's really from Northern California or from the western coast of North America. And so again, now his bones are a little bit younger.
One question: when you say Southwest Asia, or can you define what those boundaries look like in terms of what those countries are today, so that we can see it in our heads? you don't mind.
And in addition to that, Marsha, I was thinking that the term Asian, why they would even use that. Is it even talking about that region, or is it to make us think of that region rather than
But I want to get the boundaries that you're talking about, which then helps me to look at who is actually there. And then that's a whole nother piece. So to your question, Kavette, when we bring that up, if we look at that boundary of what Southwest Asia, because Asia can be a whole bunch of stuff, right? But
it may not even be Asia that you're talking about. Yeah.
So what are you seeing as Southwest Asia, if you don't mind?
Well, now, and again, when I read this statement, and so what I did is like, okay, I said, let me just go look to see what a South Asian looks like. And so what did I do? I went to Google. I typed in South Asian images. But I also looked on a map to see what countries do they consider to be South Asian countries. So again, you have to do a little bit of research so that you can identify these things. But again, it didn't take much for me to do that. Now, again, see, these boundaries today, though, are totally different than the boundaries were 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years, 50,000 years, so again, we have to keep a perspective all the time.
And I just wanted to jump in there and say, with respects to boundaries and utilizing the term Asian, again, the dominant theory is that Asians migrated to the Americas about 14,000 years ago. And so to continue to use that term would perpetuate that subconsciously inside the mind of the reader, particularly us. However, again, if we look at science and we recognize that, particularly like if we want to talk about borders, I want to talk about let's talk about America. We have 3 points in the Americas that are roughly 40 to 60,000 years old that show humans were inhabiting these regions and humans were living on this continent. All 3 of those points are on the east side. Well, one of them is in Chile, all the way down at the bottom. We talk about that later. The other 2, one is in Brazil, and the oldest, 50 to 60,000 years, and probably older because the carbon dating can't go back farther than that, is South Carolina. South Carolina, which also happens to be the same exact space where they set up the first slave port. But that's another conversation for another time. Our point is that 5,000 years ago, no, even 5,000 years ago, the continent, particularly the eastern shore of the United States, was about 50 miles further outland than it is now. And so all of that history that is buried underwater now. And just to name something that we can look at, is called the shell ring mounds. They call it shell ring mounds. Most of these shell ring mounds, particularly in the southeastern portions, are buried under water now, but they know that melanated people were living there, created these things. They eventually called these people mound builders, and they would inhabit basically the Mississippi Valley up to the Philadelphia region, down to Florida region. And, and these mound builders eventually became known as the Southern Coast. These Southern Coast people eventually became known as Negroes. Those Negroes eventually became slaves, and those slaves eventually became what we know as the African Americans of today. And when we study history ourselves, we're the only culture in the world besides the Indian and the Asian that can show not a linear path that these people stayed here throughout the history up until 200 years ago, when we allowed the English to start to perpetuate their own history on this land. And now Indigenous education is trying to make aware to the particularly Black population that our history is a myth and we have to reevaluate the totality of it. And until we do, we are going to allow cameras to be placed on our blocks. We're going to allow the descendants of our usurpers that still have that supremacy within inside of them to control the politics of our land.
I just want to introduce one fact. Are you familiar with the San Bushmen of Southern Africa? In their face
definitely
is the face of all humanity.
Oh, yeah.
The San Bushmen, S-A-N, the San Bushmen. And if you see their eyes, we have often been said that Black people have Chinese eyes. If you see a Black person, you say, oh, they got Chinese eyes. No, the Chinese have their eyes. It is the oldest DNA on planet Earth out of Namibia, the San Bushmen. Every race on Earth comes from their DNA, including the Asians. The other point I wanted to get to was the Dawes rolls.
The what?
Dawes, D-A-W-E-S rolls. Tell us about the Dawes rolls, Miss Renee.
Y'all smiling. What's that mean? What's
Okay.
That's when
Okay. Well, the Dawes rolls.
You Indian and you not.
Okay. The Dawes rolls is what the United States was creating, where now remember in history they had moved all of the Indians from the East Coast and through the Trail of Tears, and the Trail of Tears was really only for the Cherokee tribe, and they had what was called 5 civilized tribes. And so again, these 5 civilized tribes were moved across the Mississippi River over into Indian territory.
Can we just stop
Anybody
with
that was left behind.
Renee, can we just stop with the name? People. 5 civilized tribes. So the rest of them weren't civilized? Or civilized mean?
No, they weren't.
No,
No, they weren't. And you know why they weren't? You know why they weren't civilized? Because they wouldn't assimilate to the colonizing ways.
right?
They wouldn't assimilate. And so if you won't assimilate, then you're not civilized.
And
Yeah,
they
so
treat
now
us
again,
like that today. That's like today, right now, they do the same thing. That's another conversation, I'm sure.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so now what the Dawes, so when they moved these these civilized tribes over, they wanted to have a list of all of these Indians. And that is what the Dawes Rolls was about. It was about documenting the 5 civilized tribes. And again, it was only those 5 civilized tribes that they were talking about. And when they made those rolls, anybody who was of a dark complexion, they basically put them on a separate roll. They were not included on the regular Dawes rolls. They had different Dawes rolls that was called the Freedmen Dawes rolls. So even if they had ancestry, their ancestry was native, they were still put on the Freedmen roll because of the color of their skin, which always has been a determining factor when dealing with the indigenous people here. Just look at them, and we're just going to put them into this other category, and we'll just leave them there. And
I just wanted to point out, my mother was about to say, anybody that didn't go was their Indian status was removed.
They became American citizens,
and they became Negro.
What did
if
they
they
do?
were over here, yes.
If they stayed on the east side, any natives that didn't move to the Indian territory lost their native identity.
And what else did
of course,
what else?
not in blood.
What else did they lose?
What else? They lost their land too.
They
lost their land.
Which is really what it was about. It was about getting the land. That's what it's always been about, getting the land.
Right.
And the way that you get the land is to remove the people from the land. How do you remove them? You
Kill
turn
'em.
them into something that they are not. You turn them
Yeah.
into a non-citizen. You gave them a whole different culture, and
Mhm.
then you perpetually tell them that that's who they are, so that they
Right.
begin to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You ain't got no
And I just
Indian
wanted to
blood.
also, with respects to the Dawes roll, right?
And
Well,
You got no
as
Indian
long
blood.
as we allow,
I'm
right,
sorry.
and that's something that we were taught. Who taught us that? You know,
Mhm.
and then again, when the system is established to remove the identity, and so when we as a Black population think, well, first of all, it was more than just the Dawes rolls. We got Miller rolls. There are a number of
Keon
different roles.
rolls, yeah.
However, when you recognize that the colonizers that were establishing these rules and regulations, lied so that they could be in control. And now 200, 300 years later, we want to look at those documents to try to prove who we are. Really?
And they also made laws
Mm-hmm.
to take our indigenous status away from us, and to make white people become Indians, where they had hardly no Indian blood, but they were able to put themselves on those Dawes rolls because they had 1/16 Indian blood in them, where we had 15/16 Indian blood in us, but we couldn't be put on that roll because of that so-called Negro that made us become African.
So, Renee, what does that look
Which
like
is actually
today as they fight in the courts? What is that looking like today in the legal system in terms of the indigenous people?
Well, that's kind of my field. I'm actually an indigenous attorney, but that's actually what I do. And
I
I
love
actually
it.
got into indigenous education
Right on.
because legally, I can't do anything legally until the populace comprehends and understands who they are, in order to really make a big effective change.
Mhm.
However, legally, what that means is, again, some of the complications that you started this conversation off with, which is Indians come from India. And what we have to do is respect and understand that the world does not end and begin with United States. And what we have placed ourselves in a position where we only allow ourselves to be defined by United States standards.
Right.
And so legally what happens is that if you don't fit within the definitions of what the United States law has established, you stuck. We stuck right now. We stuck. However, when you step outside of the jurisdiction of the United States, which indigenous peoples can do, there's a separate set of rules and laws that are established that the United States has to abide by. Some of the issues that we have, and I'm gonna be honest with you. Yes, sir.
Is this where the
No, I just was
Moors
going to
come in?
state that some of the issues that my apologies, go ahead.
Is this where the Moors come into play? Because I know in the court system, the Moors are the last ones that the courts want to see up in their face.
Well, yeah, I guess it's a very combative situation between them and the United States. We're indigenous, and there's a set of rules and laws that are established that the United States has to abide by with respects to how the world organizes and conducts itself. And that's my thing with respects to law and politics, which is to state to us as a Black population, number one, the sovereignty movement and everything that came from white supremacy. And so
Right.
when you do your history, we got to recognize that. And so be careful. With that said, the only legal framework that has been established outside of the United States that has anything to do with us is indigenous law. The Moors have no jurisdiction at all outside of Morocco. And the United States is
right. So one of the major challenges there would be, okay, first of all, indigenous means native. So folks understand we're talking about native people who have just, naturally occurred in a place where they were. Recognizing that our ancestors were naturally occurring here long before anybody, discovered the land and then took it over. One of the challenges I know for me in understanding like where the legal ramifications come into play is we fall under the laws of the United States because they've claimed the land. And so I know one of the biggest battles has been being able to reclaim land for the native tribes. And so in that perspective, then you would be able to set up a legal structure, or laws that would then apply to us as Indigenous people. So what is that looking like today?
Well, understanding that Indigenous law is separate from Indian law or Native American law. And so what we have to do is, as Indigenous populations, we have to respect and understand that the law has, as we've been taught and what we know, is set up particularly for Indians and Native Americans on a financial benefit type of perspective, where if you come and you get recognized, we'll fund you, but however, you lose your autonomy. Mm-hmm. And what our populations don't understand is that if you have, let's talk about the Indians, what we would understand and we would consider them to be autonomous or have the ability to be self-determining. If we utilize United States laws to establish that, then you're placed in a position legally that's called a domestic dependent nation, meaning that you are your own people, but you are regulated part and partial to the United States with respects to the decision-making process. Mm-hmm. Indigenous peoples exist outside the laws of the United States, although they are recognized as dual citizens. Mm-hmm. And so and that's a larger perspective that Indigenous populations here have to re-educate ourselves on, which is that there are international laws that have been put in place for us to be able to start communicate and then instituting the policies and procedures internally and have those colonizing governments have the United States respect that. But so also as Indigenous populations.
Between the Indigenous and the Native, is that the Indigenous is international where the Native would be just on the local land or within the United States? Is that the difference?
Well, there's quite a few differences between Indigenous and Native. The main point when you step outside the United States, the difference between Indigenous and Native is that Indigenous peoples are self-responsible for their internal affairs. We can't go to the United States and try to claim land back. It's on us to go get it ourselves. But once we get it, the United States not allowed to take it back from us again. Where with respects to, if you were Native American, then you remove yourself from international definition, and the international law doesn't define Native. And so by just using the term Native or Indian, you automatically restrict yourself to United States jurisdiction. And now you got to use that as a way to establish yourself. And what we're saying is that as a colonizing government, Indigenous peoples need to reevaluate the laws that they use and then start to consider, truly being who we are, which would mean that we're obligated and responsible at a much higher level than anything that we are doing right now. I don't care if you're the president of the United States, because again, that's the colonizing government with the system already in order, and Indigenous peoples have to reestablish that order on their own behalf.
So here's my question. We talk about reparations, right? And how do the reparations relate to Native Americans and Indigenous people? And I'm sure that that's part of your mix when you talk about going into courts, right? And so where are you on that?
Well, remember that Indigenous law is already established. And so for the most part, we don't go to court. There's no need. It's just relationships and conversations and then building a mutual understanding before we move forward. We don't really bother with their courts much at all, to be honest with you.
So how
However,
do you navigate?
with
Yeah.
respects to reparations, well, that's a separate question. But before we get to that one, with respects to reparations, again, indigenous peoples are they're responsible for their own internal economic development, and so depending on what kind of stipulations come with the reparations that the government would offer, you may lose your autonomy. You may lose your ability to be self-representative, because again, we're talking about what happens is if you money, and so many of us will allow money to supersede everything because of money. And so again, the Native Americans get a form of reparations through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but they have to sign on that United States has a representative choice in their internal affairs. And so they lose their status as a sovereign people, quote unquote. And so as a populace, what the law is to set up is that we are allowed to function as a citizen of the United States. However, we're responsible for our own development. And if we take money, we better make sure that those stipulations don't interfere with our internal development, or again, legally, we lose that status, and now we don't have that function anymore. So we're talking about law now. Now you're talking.
Yeah. So is there any representation in what type of representation? Do we see that in Congress or Senate or in any other government where we're located? Is there any participation at all?
Yeah, my mom was just saying that's what we're building,
We're at the very beginnings of that.
Right.
Very beginnings.
Right on.
And in order
you're part of this also, though.
Yeah, the conversation has to be had. People have to be aware first.
So when I first met you, I didn't know this story. Since meeting you, I have learned about Chief John Horse down in Florida. Are you familiar with him, Renee?
Is he one of the ones that were over in the plains?
No, but let me pause for a second. Mondo,
is he one of the ones that were over in the plains?
Okay, Mondo, you got but let me pause for a second.
One of the ones that were over in the plains.
Okay, Mondo, you got but let me pause for a second.
One of the ones that were over in the plains.
Come on, Mondo.
Turn it off, Mondo.
I got you. Can you hear me now?
There you go. I think we got it now.
Thanks, Mondo.
All right. Good morning, brothers and sisters. How y'all doing?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I was just sitting here, pardon my, just watching, and Donnie invited me. Yeah.
That's powerful. So thank you for watching. So Donnie, why don't you talk to us?
Mondo, share some of the comments from the sidebar. They didn't see it.
Oh, they haven't been watching. I was just going along with the brother here. I myself, my family is from South Carolina. We're from Aiken, South Carolina. So I'm very familiar with a lot of the things that she's talking about. What I was talking about in the chat was about the, going on into the $5 Indians and talking about, the Dawes rolls and the fact that we understand the roles that the Moors play, and also maritime law, which we understand supersedes the laws, which is what the brother was talking about, I believe. Am I right? The attorney, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Yeah, you were breaking up a little bit.
Oh, can you hear me now? I'm sorry.
Keep going, Mondo.
Okay, so what I was talking about and wanted to actually ask him about, since I'm not an attorney, I'm just a historian of sorts. I've kind of done a little bit of everything. I myself, like I said, my family's from Aiken, South Carolina, so I'm familiar with a lot of everything that you're talking about. We were, the Geechees, what they call Geechees, we were, but I also understand. And I do believe that the conversation has to be had, a full, honest conversation, because when we start talking about the Dawes Rolls, when we start talking about $5 Indians, we're talking about the whites who are now there in our place, on our land. So yes, until we understand our place.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, so again, there's established function and order that's already been put in place on behalf of indigenous populations. And when you acknowledge and accept that and begin to conduct yourself in that way, much of the issues that we have right now become mute issues. Moot.
Right.
They become moot issues because our function will supersede that. And the reason why I'm saying that is because from from that perspective of identification, again, when we are utilizing terms that have been defined by the colonizing system, you become subjugated to that, and what I'm saying to the collective world is that there's a higher form of governance and order that have been put in place, and when we begin to look at that order and that function, issues, actually, I think the term is very racist, and personally, however, you recognize that those are issues that take away from our ability to be like, okay, look, if we're indigenous, then let's do this. We're not really concerned with anybody else is doing or what happened before now.
Right. And that's some of the work that I'm actually doing. We actually, in my family, I have, if y'all know who Leontine Price is, that's my first cousin. Charles Berry was one of the first Black captains. Charles A. Berry, you can look him up, in Charleston. They were a part of Cumberland AME, which I know all y'all know that church. So I'm familiar with it. So we have that lineage and documentation to show. So when we try to go take that and say, hey, look, this is the information that we have to prove who we are. We have been rejected by the Native American population.
Well, the system is set up. The system is set up to reject you, and that's the point.
Right.
Right. That's what we're fighting.
That is death. I'm sorry. Say that one more time, please.
I said that's exactly what we're fighting. Yes, I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah, and I know my mom want to jump in and say something. Okay. I just would say that's the point, and that's the point of what we're saying is that, hey, listen, think about this, everybody. Why would a colonizing, usurping, malignant authority offer the population that they enslaved, that they transferred, and or that they changed the identity of? Why would they allow them to start to repair that? And it's just not reasonable for any system, any corporation, or anything. If I'm built on a lie, I can't allow the lie to be replaced with the truth, because now the system won't work anymore. And so
For me,
the
right.
world system, right? And so the world system acknowledging that says, okay, listen, indigenous populations, y'all can feel safe and where you are and still be able to participate in the local affairs of the population, whether you want to vote, establish food banks, whether you want to be an actor or whether you want to be a mayor. You can do all of that. However, it's your responsibility to turn around and look at you and yours and learn how to establish a separate situation for you and yours. It's really difficult.
Let me just jump in. There was a down in Florida. Did you know? So since we last talked, I've learned that Florida, the state of Florida, was number one. It was not a part of the original colonies. It was owned by Spain and England, and it was where escaped slaves went to. And I just got to tell you, when Trayvon Martin happened, I protested Florida. I was never going to Florida another day in my life. But then I learned about how Florida was a freedom colony for escaped slaves. They had a Negro fort there. They had Gracia Real, de Santa Teresa, de Most. They all throughout Florida. That's where we were going. And so then I learned that the Second Seminole War, you ready, Mondo? The Second Seminole War was actually a slave insurrection.
Yes.
It was the largest slave insurrection in the history of the United States. And the black man who was fighting alongside the Indians, it was a black Indian named Chief John Horse.
Yeah.
He got a website, johnhorse.com. Now check this out. Y'all know I'm doing a book on Black Wall Street. After he kicked, and mind you, Florida is where Andrew Jackson got his name, because Andrew Jackson was leading the Indian removal effort down in Florida. And he hated black people and he hated Indians. And so when them white settlers went down to Florida and they saw them black Indians over there with guns, it was giving their slaves the idea of freedom. And then white people was like, oh, no, we can't have that. Long story short, at the end of the Second Seminole War, they offered the Seminoles, the black Indians, the escaped slaves, freedom in Oklahoma. So in 1840 or so, Chief John Horse, on a Trail of Tears, led about 200 families, from my understanding, on a Trail of Tears. One thing I learned from that is they will tell us that all of the blacks on the Trail of Tears were slaves. I'm here to tell you, Chief John Horse was a free man. He was killing anybody that tried to oppress him and his. He went all the way to Oklahoma. And then when he got to Oklahoma, the United States government did what it does. It lied. They promised him freedom. He got out there. Hey, Marsha, he got all the way out there. And then when they denied him his freedom, he moved to Mexico, where he became the border patrol for the Mexican government, i.e. the Seminole Scouts. He led 200 black families from Oklahoma all the way to Nacimiento, Mexico, northern Mexico. And then Mexico got a little funny acting on him, and he moved back to Texas. Chief John Horse. I'm just telling you, I've learned some things since we last talked.
It's history.
Yes, well, there is a lot of history down there in Florida. Yeah, Florida did not become a state until the mid 1700s. Yes. So it was owned by Spain. Yeah, all of that. Yeah, all of that time. There were other black colonies that, as a matter of fact, still exist in Mexico, which. It was this was in the 1800s, and Mexico again was inviting the slave, inviting them down. It's like, look, come on down here, south of the border. You could be free down here. So there are many places around that are like that. The Seminoles, the name Seminole itself just meant runaway.
Right.
and so, and what they were saying is that, that these are these remnant Black people. And again, we have statements that say that the Negro, that the coastal tribes, that all of the coastal tribes got completely absorbed into the Negro race. And this is one of their statements in the Smithsonian Institute. Okay, so see, they already know, they know who we are. They know that we were, part of the Seminole tribe, but again, that was just the last remnant of it. Okay, what about from the late 1400s all the way up until those 1800s, when we're talking about that Trail of Tears? What about those hundreds of years, of our history? So there is so much that we need to learn so that we can properly identify ourselves.
Right.
Just so much history that they just removed us from.
Right. Do you all travel with your lectures at all, or how do people interface with you to learn more about this? This has been a fascinating conversation, and I didn't have enough research to be able to have a real conversation with you, but I want to learn more, and I'm very excited about what you're doing. And I want to know how our listeners and viewers can learn more and learn more about ourselves and us individually and our families and our heritage. This is powerful, right? This is our show, right?
If you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I just want to say, if you don't mind me sharing, first thing I'd like to say with everybody, please be diligent with your information. Just like we see with alternative facts, if you only use YouTube or Facebook to get your information, even if it's somebody Black sharing this information, you got to make sure, we have to be better as a population. And we have to hold those that get a lot of views and supposedly have big names inside of our communities. We got to start holding them to a higher standard too. With that said, we actually published a few books. So my mother wrote a few books, Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Those books are available on Amazon, on our website. We do have workshops where we offer information from this perspective on Mondays and Wednesdays. You can look on our website for flyers and email us. But our website is indedu.org. Again, we have the TV show, America's Dark-Skinned Past. It airs starting next Friday at 10:30 a.m. So the teachers can start to share with their students over time. And that airs on Apple and on Roku on a network called Philly Cam.
I want to express, though, a little bit further, because you were asking about interaction. The classes that the workshops or classes that we hold. All right. On Mondays, we hold them on Monday evenings at 7:00. And my son teaches those. And he deals with the law as far as Indigenous is concerned. And so, again, that's on Mondays at 7 p.m. On Wednesdays in Eastern Standard Time, on Wednesdays at 7 p.m., I teach about the history. And so I go into the history of this. And so he does the law part, I do the history part, so we try to cover as much as we can. So again, that's Monday evenings and Wednesday evenings. And again, you can find that information on the website at indedu.org.
Right. And these are introductory courses.
Yes.
And my grandson is homeschooled, and a lot of my friends are my daughter's friends are homeschooling their children, and these could be very important lessons that they could look at to be able to share with their young people. So start thinking about that. And if any of your books relate to middle school and high school people, that would be important too. I think that this is information that must be distributed to our people and to get clarity. Most of us haven't done the genealogy. We don't really know, but it's still our history. And we have to see how we integrate that into modern day times and what we should do. And as you were speaking about, you're working on how we go about having representation in Washington on the Hill, in the Senate and in Congress. That's critical because there are voices that need to be heard. But I so respect you and the work that you're doing, and I really appreciate all that you've said today. It's been quite enlightening and informative. And Donnie turned me off because I was looking down, but I've been filling my notebook with notes. And so I've been sitting here writing all this stuff. I got several pages of stuff that I've been writing. So with my head's down, I'm working. This is what I'm doing.
Well, if I may say again,
thank you so much for sharing.
It's
Absolutely.
huge.
Yeah, no, it makes a huge difference. I did have an opportunity to do some genealogy early on, back when before I was 20, and I had an aunt who was interested. We actually took a sojourn to South Carolina, I believe it was, Swan Quarter, maybe North Carolina, in order to get that information. Not everybody has that opportunity. So are there any resources where we can go to, kind of start to put together that genealogy and understand, where we can get the resources that we need in order to gain the knowledge and get the understanding?
The best place I would suggest to go is start at your local libraries.
Mm-hmm. And what books do you recommend that someone would look up if they're going and they're starting for the very first time? They've never done any genealogy. They've never looked in the history books before. Where would they go to find that information?
Can I say something? If we want to find a party,
to me,
we ain't got no problem finding the damn party in DC. You know how to do it, Cavette. We find what we want to find.
I know how to do it. I've done it, but I'm talking about those who are watching us, those young people who are watching us and listening, who, you can tell them, go find it yourself, and I got mine, you go get yours, because that's what people have said for decades. And that's part of the problem why our community is where it is, because we always go find it for yourself. But I'm asking so that people can get a little help in that process, Donnie.
Okay, you type in Black Indians, you type in Indigenous, you type in the various names, Cherokee, Apache, Blackfoot, Taino.
Exactly, but if they don't know those names, then they don't know.
Okay, well, Cavette, this ain't for retarded people. If they can't figure it out, we can figure out a party in DC with no directions, but we can't find the financial aid building at the university. We find what we want to find. If we want to find it, we'll find it. I'm convinced of that. Mondo, what do you say?
That's true, but what I would say
can I add something in here though? I would like to add this, and this is one reason why we started what we were doing. We know, and again, I found out for myself that when I do research, if I go and research my family, if I'm going into census records and old census records, eventually all of us are going to run into a brick wall that we cannot go through. And that brick wall is the census, that there is none recording Black people unless you were free before the 1860s. And so anybody that has ancestors, if they were not free before 1860, you are not going to find them. It's going to be very, very difficult. But that is why we did what we did, is because we know that history. We know that history is hidden from us. We know what they did to Black people when they came here. We know that they mixed us up and turned us into something else. And so the thing is that if we know that history, then we can then say who we are with authority, because we have the history. And that's why this history is just so important for us to know.
Right. And then with the history, now we can reestablish ourselves with some, foundation and grounding ways, and again, legally have the space and the opportunity to do that in a homogenous way. And when indigenous peoples in general, very in touch culturally with their environment, with other people, and the function of, being considerate of the next individual. And so, from that perspective, that's another direction that this indigenous movement will have to be different from what we know as the very, very aggressive, authoritative, not combative, and sometimes inability to work with the authorities to establish something. You know, indigenous populations, there's a valuable means of establishing and organizing. And when we do acknowledge that, use that in a respectful way, and again, being considerate of the totality of the situation that we have, we can navigate and move fairly easily and clean. Our issue is that amongst ourselves, without this education of even the thought of actually reconsidering who we are in our totality. Not that the African diaspora isn't a part of our history, it's just not the only part.
Right.
And when we add other portions in, we have rights, we have opportunities, we have responsibilities that we are ignoring at the moment.
You know, I also want to add in there, though, is that we cannot do the same things that were done to us. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so there are many, let's say, indigenous people who are much fairer in complexion than I am. Okay. Mm-hmm. However, that does not take their indigenous from them, because some of them got treated worse than we did. At least we were able to hold on to some of our melanation that we were able to keep when some of them were not. And then they got fooled into thinking that they are something else. And so there's a whole education that has to happen. A whole education that has to happen.
And
that's real.
You know, the disparity, and the bigotry and the racism that perpetuates inside of
even within our community, yes,
is something that we have to recognize that we got from our usurpers.
I've had to deal with that my entire life. My entire life, I've had to deal with that. I was never black enough, but I would always look green. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm just as black as you are. What do you mean?
They treat us like we black. You know what I mean?
That's right. They treat us like we're black.
You know, and I come from the inner city. You know, we come from, you know, my mother worked in the public school system 6 blocks from me, and you know what I mean, in Philadelphia. And so we come from that community that we talk like the underprivileged, underserved community. We know that. I know that. I came from that. I was raised in that. And so, you know, recognizing that and saying, okay, wait a second. The reason why it's underprivileged and underserved is because we're not serving ourselves. We're allowing a system that was established to set the standards that we should be using on how we conduct our business and our affairs. And we just have to learn how to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And that means re-educating ourselves beyond what mainstream education system has offered us so far. And until we are able to acknowledge that responsibility and then uphold our obligations to the next generation, we are where we are.
We have a big job ahead of us.
Yes.
Accountability and responsibility are the two main things. Because if you want to touch on that and going back further, you know, back into what you were saying, you know, then we need to have the conversation about Anthony Johnson, who was the first slave owner, one of the biggest slave owners in Virginia. You know, we want to have the conversation about one of the first books I read was The Secret Relationship Between Black and Jews, you know, and that whole thing. Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right. But what I say is, I'm with you. If you're going to have the conversation, you have to talk about both sides, the good, the bad, the ugly, the pretty, all of it. The things that we did to ourselves. We can talk about the paper bag test.
Lord have mercy.
You know, right. I was a victim and product of that.
Lord.
My family is from Aiken, South
Carolina.
Right. But like I said, I'm a Price. I'm also a Smoot. I know Donnie knows about the Smoot family in DC. So we went up into, after emancipation, we went up into Charleston, West Virginia, to get away from that.
Right.
And we became what's known as the Melungeons, which that's a whole other conversation in itself.
Right.
All right.
So all of these
Yes.
things,
This has been wonderful. This has been wonderful.
yes, they're all separate conversations, but I think we have to become or get to the point where we say, okay, no matter what happens, we have to tell the entire story.
Right.
Because until we do that, we're not going to be able to understand or respect the conversation to be had. And yes, some feelings going to get hurt, but we have to start. That's the only way we're going to be able to start over again.
All right. I think that's a good way to end. Thank you so much. And I'm glad that you were chatting so that we could get your input. Thank you all.
I'm in Baltimore.
That's good. But let me tell you something. This has been a powerful show and I've learned a lot. And like I said, I've been taking all kinds of notes and going to be in touch with you guys because
why was it powerful?
It was powerful because there was information that I didn't know. And anything's powerful if I'm learning, and I like to learn. And so to be able to have now a conduit, somebody that I can see and talk to and hear about our past, things that I hadn't really thought about even looking up. So, and these are things that I can share with my grandson and my relatives that would be helpful. And particularly now that we're on COVID and everybody's in place, right? So this could be something that folks could be able to share with their young people while they're home and do our little channel in how we connect to one another and have our own Zooms with some of these discussions. And I think it's not what they're going to get in school. Right. And so I certainly didn't get it 100 years ago in my school. They wasn't trying to give me any kind of information, anything about anybody with some melanin unless his name was Carver. So, for us to be able to have this information, and I love it. Now my brain is moving and I like that. Sometimes we get dulled with the norm, but there's some electrodes going on now up there. So thank you. And I appreciate your input. Thank you very much.
Kavette, what'd you learn?
I learned that what you guys right now are continuing to do in the community is absolutely significant. I've been motivated to go back into the research that I have done already. Remembering, I did have a whole file cabinet full of information that I'd lost, unfortunately, over the years. But going back to recapture that information, COVID has brought my family together. So once a month, we do have a family conference call, and we're doing some historical recording and things like that. And it's just an encouragement. And so I'm going to talk more about our Native history and in our Indigenous history, and recognizing the difference between the two, and understanding how significant that is today. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. I appreciate it.
I got to say in conclusion, and thank you for joining us, Mondo. I appreciate you taking the time. When we first did that video a few years back, when I did the one where we met, you saw the Black Indian one. One of the comments that I saw from Black people were, Donnie, why are you always trying to introduce Black Indians? Donnie, why don't you want to be anything but African from our own people? And it's like, dude, go talk to your grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you don't know who you are, you can't accept.
We can be both.
People don't know what they don't know. And so if you tell them, they're not going to know. So that's what we're here to do, to be able to uplift and inform and entertain and educate. Encourage. And there you go. All right.
Encourage.
Thank you very much. This has been a beautiful show. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Renee and Tavis, nothing but love. We got to do the Black Wall Street Awards up there in Philadelphia once this COVID relaxes. Up to date down tomorrow. Do your day and everything will follow. Nothing to it but to do it. I got to do it, regardless of how I feel. I am somebody. I am my brother's keeper. Good morning, Baltimore.
Good morning.
Good morning, Baltimore.
Wow. Everybody. Peace.